My name is Andrea Reed, and this is where my story begins, in the tall brown house on Willow Street, in Boston, America. If you walked past it in the fall, you might think it was one of those postcard homes that tourists stop to photograph. It has white-trimmed windows, a wide porch with rocking chairs, and a blue front door that always smells faintly of paint and sea air. A single maple tree stands in the yard, tall and faithful, shedding leaves that fall like little paper boats every October. When I was a child, my father used to rake them into piles, and my sister Linda and I would leap into them, laughing until our cheeks hurt. My parents, Ellen and Robert Reed, bought this house more than 30 years ago, when they were still dreaming about a future they could build with their own hands. Every dollar they earned went into this place, and in return, the house seemed to hold its breath for us, keeping us safe from the world outside. I never knew how much that house meant to me until everything started to fall apart. It wasn't just a building. It was a heartbeat, a memory, a reminder of all the quiet things we take for granted. Sunday breakfasts, the smell of pancakes, my mother's voice calling us down the stairs. I thought I would live here forever. I even imagined raising my own family within those same walls. I thought love would bloom here too, strong and unshakable, like that maple tree in the front yard. That was before Anthony Brooks walked into my life. He wasn't from Boston. He said he'd grown up between New York City and Chicago, traveling for business. I met him at a charity event for a local art foundation. I was volunteering at the front desk, arranging name cards, when I noticed him, tall, clean-cut, in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my car. He had that polished confidence that some men wear like a second skin. When he smiled, it was all warmth and charm, and when he spoke, his voice was deep, steady, practiced. He told me he worked in finance, investment strategy, he said, though he never explained what that actually meant. He spoke of luxury cars, dinners in London, and summers by a private lake house up north. I suppose I wanted to believe him. He seemed to live the kind of life that novels promised and real people rarely found. When he took me out to dinner the following week, at a restaurant overlooking the Charles River, he paid the bill without looking at the amount. I remember glancing at the check. $318. He left a $100 tip, as if it were nothing. That was the kind of man Anthony Brooks was, or at least the kind of man he wanted to appear to be. My parents were polite when they met him, but my mother's eyes told another story. He's charming, she said afterward, but charm isn't character, Andrea. I laughed it off, thinking she just didn't understand. My sister, Linda, was different. She adored him immediately. She said he looked like a movie star, like one of those men who always knows what to say and how to say it. You're lucky, she told me one night as we shared wine in the kitchen. Men like him don't fall from the sky. I smiled and nodded, but something inside me was already uneasy, though I couldn't yet name why. By the time winter came, Anthony and I were engaged. He proposed at the public garden, under a sky that looked ready to snow. The ring sparkled, a diamond so bright it made my eyes water. I didn't ask where it came from or how much it cost. I only thought about how it looked on my hand, about how my parents smiled and Linda hugged me, about how happy I should have felt. I told myself love was supposed to feel like certainty, like safety. But with Anthony, it often felt like walking through fog. The first argument we had was about money. I worked as a freelance writer, small pieces for travel magazines and online columns, enough to live comfortably, though not extravagantly. Anthony said I should let him take care of things. He wanted me to move some of my savings, around $25,000, into an account he managed. You'll get better returns, he said, smiling that smooth smile. I'll handle it like I handle my own investments. I hesitated. My father always taught me never to mix love with finances. I told Anthony I'd think about it. That's when I first saw the flicker in his eyes, a flash of something cold, sharp, controlling. That night, that terrible night in February, I came home late from my mother's. Anthony was already in the kitchen, pacing. I could tell he'd been drinking. There was an open bottle of whiskey on the counter. He asked again about the money, and I said no, gently but firmly. He stepped closer, his voice tightening. You don't trust me? He asked. After everything? I tried to calm him, told him it wasn't about trust, that I just wanted to wait until after the wedding. But the more I spoke, the angrier he became. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. I tried to pull away, and in that split second, the knife slipped. I don't remember the exact moment the blade touched me. I remember the sound, metal against air, and then the heat spreading across my side. The pain was sharp, blinding. The kitchen lights blurred into white streaks. I stumbled backward, my hand pressing against the wound, and saw the red blooming through my shirt. Anthony froze, his face pale and terrified. He dropped the knife, as if it had burned him. "Andrea," he said, "Oh my God, I didn't mean to." The next hour passed like a dream. He drove me to the emergency room, saying it was an accident, that I had slipped. I couldn't think clearly. I just kept nodding, afraid of what might happen if I said otherwise. The nurse, Maya, asked what happened, and I lied. I said I fell on a kitchen knife while cooking. She gave me a long, searching look, but wrote down my words anyway. I got stitches, 10 of them, and a doctor told me I was lucky. "An inch deeper," he said, "and it could have been fatal." I smiled weakly, thanked him, and told Anthony I wanted to go home. That night, as I lay in bed, I listened to the wind outside brushing against the maple tree. It sounded like the house was breathing with me. Anthony sat in the chair across the room, silent, his face hidden in shadow. I wanted to ask him why. I wanted him to apologize, to explain. But I didn't. I told myself it was an accident. I told myself people lose their temper. I told myself love could fix things. In the morning, he brought me breakfast, toast, eggs, and a small vase with a single white rose. "We'll forget last night," he said softly. I nodded. But deep inside, I knew something had broken, not just in my body, but in the life I thought I was building. I looked around the kitchen, at the sunlight spilling across the floorboards, at the faint stain near the counter, already scrubbed clean. I thought of my parents' laughter, of my sister's easy smile, of how peaceful the house once felt. And I realized the house on Willow Street had seen everything. It knew the truth before I could speak it. It held the secret for me, quietly, like it always did. That was the night I learned that silence can be both a shield and a prison. Spring in Boston has a way of fooling you. The air grows soft, and the trees turn green again, as if the world is offering you a chance to start over. I remember thinking that maybe I could too. After that night in February, the knife, the hospital, the silence, I told myself that time would heal everything. The wound on my side closed, leaving only a thin scar, but the one inside me never did. Anthony kept calling. He sent flowers to the house, tulips, lilies, expensive bouquets that made my mother ask, "Is he trying to apologize or advertise?" I laughed weakly, pretending it didn't hurt to see his handwriting on those little cards. Each message said something like, "I miss you," or "Let's talk when you're ready." I ignored them for weeks. Then one Thursday morning in April, my phone buzzed again. His message was short. "I won't be meeting today. I have an office meeting." That was all. No greeting, no name, no emotion. But I knew the tone, that calm, clipped rhythm he used when he was lying. Anthony never had an office meeting on a Thursday. I don't know why, but my stomach turned cold. Something in me, maybe instinct, maybe foolish hope, told me to find out where he really was. I grabbed my coat, my wallet, and walked out the blue front door of the house on Willow Street. The sky was a pale, watery blue, the kind that makes you think of beginnings, even when you're walking toward an ending. A week earlier, while tidying Anthony's old jacket, the one he'd left behind after the argument, I'd found a small florist receipt crumpled in the pocket. It was from Cambridge Blooms, with an address near Boston City Hall. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now that address buzzed in my head like a secret waiting to be caught. I hailed a cab, told the driver where to go, and tried to steady my breathing. When we arrived, the streets were crowded. City Hall was a hive of voices, people coming and going, couples laughing, photographers adjusting their lenses. I stood by the stone steps, clutching my coat tighter. It felt strange being there alone, as if I were trespassing on someone else's life. Then, through the moving crowd, I saw him. Anthony Brooks. My fiancé, or rather, the man I thought was my fiancé, stood at the foot of the steps wearing a gray suit and that familiar self-assured smile. But he wasn't alone. Next to him was Linda, my sister, my own flesh and blood. She wore a short cream-colored dress and held a small bouquet of red roses. Her golden hair caught the sunlight, and for a moment, she looked like a stranger. I froze. My heart seemed to stop, then restart in slow motion. Anthony leaned toward her, said something that made her laugh softly, then reached for her hand. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe they were attending someone else's ceremony. Maybe I was imagining it. But then I saw Luke, our neighbor, standing beside them, holding a pen and a clipboard. He was signing as a witness. And there, beneath the marble arch of Boston City Hall, a clerk in a navy suit read words I couldn't hear, words I knew too well. I didn't cry. I didn't even move. The world blurred, the noise around me fading into silence. When the clerk smiled and shook their hands, Linda slipped a gold ring onto her finger, and Anthony kissed her cheek. In that moment, I realized something I hadn't before. Betrayal doesn't always come with shouting or storms. Sometimes it comes quietly, like a shadow sliding across your heart. I turned away, walked down the block until I found a small flower shop. The smell of roses and daffodils filled the air, sharp and sweet. The woman behind the counter asked if I needed help. Just something simple, I said. My voice didn't even sound like mine. I picked out a bouquet of daisies, the same kind I used to bring my mother when I was a girl, and paid $12. I remember the exact amount because my hands trembled as I counted the bills. Then I walked back to City Hall. I stood near the side exit, where newlyweds often came out to take pictures. The sun had shifted. The shadows stretched long across the pavement. And then, there they were, Linda and Anthony, walking out hand in hand. He was saying something, smiling that same practiced smile. But when he looked up and saw me standing there, the color drained from his face. His eyes widened and his smile froze. He stopped moving, as if the ground had turned to glass beneath him. Linda followed his gaze and saw me too. Her lips parted, but no words came out. "Congratulations," I said, holding out the bouquet. My voice was calm, almost steady. "For both of you." Anthony didn't take the flowers. He just stared, his throat bobbing like he wanted to speak, but couldn't find the words. Linda looked from me to him, confusion flickering across her face. I smiled, not because I was happy, but because I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. I placed the bouquet in his hands. "These are for you," I said softly. "You should have them. They'll suit the occasion." Then I turned and walked away, each step heavy but certain. Behind me, I could hear Linda saying something, maybe calling my name, but I didn't look back. I just kept walking down Tremont Street, past the shops and the noise and the people who would never know what had just happened. The city blurred around me like a dream dissolving into daylight. When I reached the house on Willow Street, I unlocked the blue door and stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and coffee. My mother was in the kitchen, humming while stirring soup on the stove. She turned and smiled. "You're home early," she said. I wanted to tell her everything. That Anthony had lied, that Linda had betrayed me, that I'd just watched them exchange vows, but the words stuck in my throat. "Yeah," I said instead, forcing a smile. "I just needed some air." I went upstairs to my room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. My reflection in the mirror looked calm, almost peaceful, but my hands were shaking. I thought about the last text he sent. "I have an office meeting." The cruelty of its simplicity made me laugh, a quiet, broken sound. Outside my window, the maple tree swayed in the evening wind. I could hear the leaves whispering against the glass. I thought about how that tree had seen everything, my childhood games, my first heartbreak, my engagement, and now this. It stood there, patient and strong, while everything else in my life fell apart. I don't know how long I sat there. Maybe an hour, maybe longer. When the sky turned dark, I finally whispered aloud, He doesn't know me anymore. And that was true. Anthony Brooks might have known my smile, my habits, my fears, but he never knew my strength. That night, I promised myself one thing. I wouldn't let him take any more from me. Not my peace, not my dignity, not my house, and certainly not my story. Because while he thought I was broken, I was only silent. And silence, I was beginning to learn, can be the sharpest weapon of all. When the truth finally came out, I didn't feel anger anymore. What I felt was something quieter, sharper, clarity. Anthony had lied. Linda had married him. My parents had protected me in ways I hadn't even realized. And now, it was time to face what was left of us. I asked Linda to come to the house on Willow Street. She agreed, though her voice on the phone trembled. She arrived that Sunday afternoon, the sky gray and low over Boston. She wore a gold ring that looked too heavy for her thin hand, and her smile tried too hard to look steady. Anthony waited in the car outside, his engine humming faintly, like a warning. Inside, the house was warm and smelled faintly of coffee and pine. I had set 2 cups of tea on the table, trying to make it feel like any other day. "Sit," I said softly. She did, her eyes darting to the windows. I could see her confusion and a flicker of guilt she didn't yet understand. "Linda," I began, "I love you, but you need to hear the truth. Anthony stabbed me last February. I never told anyone because I was scared. He said it was an accident, but it wasn't. He is not who he pretends to be. He isn't rich. He lied about everything, the car, the condo, the cabin by the lake. He married you because he thought he could take our parents' property." Her face drained of color. For a long moment, she said nothing. Her eyes flicked toward the window again, toward the road where Anthony sat waiting. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, "That can't be true. He loves me." I reached into my folder and slid Ms. Green's papers across the table. "Read," I told her. "These are copies of the will. I inherit the house and the building on Charles Street. You have a trust, and you'll always be secure. But Anthony? He gets nothing. He thought he was marrying into a fortune, but he married into a mistake of his own making." Linda hesitated, then opened the folder. Her eyes moved across the pages slowly, the color returning to her cheeks in sudden, hot flushes. When she reached the bottom of the page, she pressed her hands to her face. "I didn't know," she whispered. "He told me you were the one who lied. He said you cheated on him, that you went crazy after the engagement ended." Her voice broke. "He said you hurt yourself." I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing through the sting of those words. "He hurt me," I said. "And he lied because that's what men like him do. They make others carry their guilt." I stood and walked to the window, watching the gray car idle by the curb. "I gave him flowers after your wedding," I said softly. "Not because I forgave him, but because I wanted him to see me standing, alive, unbroken." Linda wiped her eyes, then stood up. "I have to talk to him," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. I followed her to the porch and watched as she walked to the car. The cold air brushed against my skin, carrying the faint smell of rain. Anthony looked up when she approached, his expression tense, wary. I couldn't hear what they said, but I saw the moment she pulled off her ring and dropped it into his hand like a coin he had no right to keep. He said something. His lips moved fast, but Linda turned and walked away without looking back. When she came inside again, her eyes were red, but her face was calm. "Can I stay here tonight?" she asked quietly. I nodded. "The guest room is ready," I said, though I had only just made it that morning, with the quilt our mother had sewn years ago. That night, the house on Willow Street felt both heavy and peaceful. Linda slept upstairs, and I sat by the window in my room, listening to the rain tapping against the glass. I thought about all that had happened, the lies, the silence, the fear, and realized I didn't hate her. She had been blind, just as I had once been. A week later, she filed for divorce. Anthony called a few times, but neither of us answered. Eventually, the calls stopped. The maple tree outside turned a deeper green as summer approached, its leaves whispering in the wind, like an old friend telling me it was over. I started taking long walks again, down by the Charles River, where the water moved slow and steady, never rushing, never fighting the current. Ms. Green helped me finalize the paperwork for the house and the building, and my parents began to smile again at dinner. The house felt lighter, like it had forgiven us too. Sometimes, I open the old book where I press the daisies I bought the day of their wedding. They're brown and fragile now, but I keep them as a reminder of the day I chose truth over fear. My name is Andrea Reed, and I still live in the house on Willow Street in Boston, America. The walls here have seen everything: love, betrayal, forgiveness, and still they stand. I guard my peace the way my parents guarded their savings, carefully, quietly, with open eyes. This isn't the end of my story. It's the start of something new. And when I tell it plain. He tried to take my future with lies, but the truth and this house and my own 2 hands held firm. When I woke that Sunday morning, Boston was wrapped in a soft gray fog, the kind that makes the city sound quieter than it really is, as if the world itself is holding its breath. I had already made my decision the night before. I would face Linda. I would tell her the truth. Every part of it, no matter how much it hurt us both. I wasn't sure what would happen afterward, but I knew silence was no longer protection. It was poison. I brewed coffee and set the kettle on for tea, moving slowly through the house on Willow Street, every step echoing a kind of calm resolve. The maple tree outside was full now, its leaves trembling in the light wind. It had seen everything: my childhood, my mistakes, my heartbreak, and somehow still stood tall. Around noon, a car engine hummed outside. I peered through the lace curtain and saw Linda's silver sedan parked at the curb. Anthony was in the driver's seat, staring straight ahead. I could see the tension in his posture, the tight line of his jaw. Linda opened the passenger door and stepped out. She wore a beige coat, her hair pulled back neatly. She looked like she was trying to hold herself together. When she knocked, I opened the door before she could raise her hand again. "Come in," I said softly. My voice didn't shake this time. Inside, I had already set the table: 2 teacups, a pot of chamomile, and a small plate of lemon biscuits my mother had made earlier that morning. I gestured toward the seat across from me. Linda hesitated before sitting down, her eyes scanning the familiar walls, the photos, the vase of daisies by the window. "I know you're angry," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "And I understand. But Anthony told me you've been—" "Stop," I said gently. "Please, just let me talk first." She froze, her eyes searching mine. I took a deep breath, steady and slow. "Linda, I love you. You're my sister, and that will never change. But you need to know the truth about the man you married." She blinked, confused, and tried to speak, but I continued. "Anthony stabbed me in February. We fought over money. He wanted me to transfer my savings into an account he controlled. When I refused, he lost his temper. I spent the night in the hospital." Her hands went still. "Andrea, no. He told me it was an accident." "It wasn't," I said. My tone was calm, almost too calm. "I didn't report it because I was scared. I told myself it was a mistake, that he didn't mean it. But that's what he does. He lies, he manipulates, and he makes people doubt themselves until they can't tell up from down." I reached into the folder beside me and slid a set of papers across the table. "These are from our lawyer, Ms. Green. They're copies of the will. Read them." Linda hesitated, then picked them up. Her eyes moved across the lines slowly, her brow furrowing as she read. When she reached the end, she set them down, her face pale. "It says you inherit the house, the Charles Street building, the accounts." "Yes," I said quietly. "Everything goes to me. You have a trust fund that pays you monthly, but Anthony doesn't get a penny, not from me, not from our parents. He thought marrying you would make him rich. But he married you because he didn't know the truth." Linda's breathing quickened. She looked toward the window, her eyes darting to the car outside. "He said he loved me," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He said you ruined him, that you tried to control him." I felt a pang in my chest. "I once believed him too," I said softly. "He's good at that, making lies sound like love." I paused, choosing my words carefully. Do you remember the day of your wedding? When you walked out of City Hall and I handed him flowers? Linda nodded slowly, tears gathering in her eyes. I brought those daisies because I wanted to look him in the eye and show him that he hadn't broken me. I said that no matter what he took, I still had myself, and that was something he could never own. Linda stood suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. I need to talk to him, she said. Her voice shook, but there was steel in it. I followed her to the porch, my heart pounding. The air was cool and heavy with the scent of rain. Anthony looked up as she approached, confusion flickering across his face. They spoke for a few minutes. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I saw the moment Linda slipped off her wedding ring and pressed it into his palm. His shoulders stiffened. She turned away and walked back toward me, tears streaking down her cheeks. He didn't deny it, she said quietly when she reached me. He didn't even try. Then you know what to do, I said. She nodded. Can I stay here tonight? Of course, I said. Your room's ready. I had prepared it earlier, the old guest room with the white quilt our mother made years ago, the one with stitched flowers in the corners. I left her there to rest, closing the door softly behind me. That night, I sat in the living room with a blanket over my knees, watching the rain fall against the windows. The house felt different, lighter, maybe, or perhaps it was just me. For months, I had carried the weight of secrets that weren't mine to keep. Now, for the first time, I felt free. A week later, Linda filed for divorce. Ms. Green handled the paperwork quietly, efficiently. Anthony called a few times, but neither of us answered. Then, he stopped calling altogether. Word spread that he'd left Boston, chasing some new business venture in New York. I didn't care where he went, as long as it was far away. As spring turned to summer, the maple tree outside grew lush and green again. The house filled with light and laughter, the kind I hadn't heard in a long time. My parents started visiting more often, bringing groceries and staying for dinner. Linda began volunteering at an art program downtown. Slowly, we stitched ourselves back together. One afternoon, I found the book where I had pressed the daisies from that awful day. They were dry now, their petals brown but still shaped like stars. I smiled as I closed the book. Those flowers were proof that even something fragile could survive, if it refused to wilt. Now, when I look at the house on Willow Street, I don't see the place where my heart broke. I see where I rebuilt it. The walls have seen everything: betrayal, truth, forgiveness, and still they stand, solid and unyielding. I am Andrea Reed, and I live in Boston, America. I have my house, my peace, and my own two hands. And when I tell this story, I tell it plain. He tried to take my future with lies, but truth and the strength I didn't know I had saved me. This isn't the end. It's the beginning.